Welcome to Talk Politics, the only show where you don't just watch the news, but help make it. And like always, we're happy to talk with all of you today about all the interesting things going on in the federal landscape. Started to talk about what's going on in the state house, add some commentary, and get to the bottom of the world's problems. We're going to cover all the questions you guys asked in our Public Talk Politics group, and we will get to it. And our initial question was freedom for all. Should we indeed thank the Freedom Caucus for what it was that they were able to do and secure? In my mind, I think maybe the answer is yes, but we'll get to that later today. Also, if you want to help our mission to foster civil discussion amongst friends and not enemies, to convert enemies to friends, go to ko-fi.com/Reichenbach Media to donate. We certainly need all the support we can get in order to compete with the big news outlets out there. In the meantime, how y'all doing? You doing good? Things been all right? You happy with the political landscape? Whatever you're feeling, thinking, doing, want to know, hey, I'm happy to hear from you. Go to, well, type it in the chat. Type it in the chat. We'll be looking forward to hearing from all of you. But we're also going to hear from all of you in our Pulse of the People segment in our Talk Politics page. So without further ado, Pulse of the People. So in our discussion for Pulse of the People, well, what we got going on here is what everyone thinks of Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. So we will be getting to that, and we got various responses. We do have a technological problem here going on, but we're still going to get to what it is that you guys think. So what do you guys think? Should Kevin McCarthy be Speaker of the House? And the reason why I started off with this question is because it certainly was a contentious race between those who thought he should be Speaker of the House and those who didn't. And one reason why there were so many people that didn't think that Kevin McCarthy should be Speaker of the House, for those who don't know, is because they didn't trust his past track record. In a article written by Scott Perry's team said, hey, Kevin McCarthy back in 2017 supported a budget that got rid of congressional spending caps. So think about that. Imagine supporting a budget that got rid of congressional spending caps. That's the issue that the group, or what's called the House Freedom Caucus, a group of approximately 20 lawmakers, took issue with. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that things were more democratic in the House. There would be some assurance that there was going to be less spending, and that there would indeed be a commitment to having a committee to investigate these federal agencies that somehow escape public. Well, they deal with public scrutiny, but there's no public accountability for what the FBI or CIA does. And so what the people said, what you guys are talking about, what do you guys think? Should Kevin McCarthy be Speaker of the House? No. Even if he makes a deal, he's a swamp rat. Well, it's a rhetoric that I don't typically use, but I can understand some of the frustration of the grassroots, particularly from a GOP that historically has done very little or not been successful in cutting spending. Andrew says the support of the WEF, Gaki conceded he should not want to be appointed dog catcher. Well, so a lot of vitriol, a highly contentious issue, and really not a lot of agreement about whether or not McCarthy should be Speaker at this point in time. And at this point in time, it's the beginning of last week, and people knew very little about the nature of this debate. Matt says, yes, McCarthy is the one who can keep the caucus together. 20 people shouldn't be able to decide that alone. And I went back and forth with Matt saying, hey, how do we know? How do we know that he can keep the caucus together? What record does somebody like McCarthy have? Well, we didn't totally have a record. People in the media really didn't describe what the benefit of having McCarthy as a speaker was. They just said, well, if you don't, Democrats are going to take control. You're going to concede control to Democrats, yada, 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 so on and so forth. All that turned out to be false. Ray said McCarthy would be a good speaker to get the job done. He preferred Jim Jordan. But really, what I wanted to ask Ray in this is, hey, what reason do we think that investigations that are going to be set up, what good are those going to do when it comes to taxes and spending? Well, of course, we don't have an answer. And Ray mentioned, well, he thinks the truth will cause no change, but it's worth trying to get to the bottom of it with these agencies. And as I was pointing out, well, and as Don pointed out, that the Benghazi hearings were all theater. So those were the alleged benefits. Most people didn't support McCarthy, at least in our Talk Politics group. One person did. At that point in time, I didn't know whom to support personally, because I didn't have a reason to just assume that McCarthy should be speaker. And I don't think for American people we should just trust that somebody's telling us that somebody's going to be a good leader, so that means that they're going to be a good leader. I don't think we can trust that anymore. We have to look at people's voting record and the policy that they support. And if that individual speaker, for example, isn't going to go on record as to why they should be speaker, then we shouldn't have our reps vote for or support that. Just fundamentally, nobody's entitled to become speaker, regardless of how much we like them or how bad people think Democrats are. And that ought to be known. If we don't believe entitlement spending, we shouldn't believe in entitlement politicking. But I'm interested in hearing what you guys think. What do you guys think about the McCarthy situation? Was it fair? Was it sensible? Was it good? Did it set our country back? Hey, let me know. Chat. So then, moving on from that, the next day I mentioned that, hey, look, Congress hardly ever debates any issue of substance. So then why is the debate surrounding the House Freedom Caucus considered a bad thing? After all, most of us knew nothing. We didn't know a single thing about the rules or the rules package or anything about how Congress worked at this point in time, particularly when it came to choosing the House Speaker. Okay. And as Dawn correctly points out, she mentioned in our Talk Politics group that the debate was happening because at one point in time, Pelosi set up the House rules to make it so that she controlled the agenda. She made sure that things go through. All things have to pass through Pelosi and leadership. And for people who support democracy, that should be a fundamental problem. Either we support democracy or we don't. And that means more than just counting votes, but it also means the governing practices within the House. If we support democracy, then we must support our representatives being able to add amendments, having greater say about who gets on what committee, right? And so a lot of people agreed with Don. She shared a link from Patel. And then I thought Ryan made a good point here when he mentioned every day without a speaker is a day that Congress can't sell out America. And so, right, that's the exact point that I was making, or at least had in my mind, was, okay, so people are complaining, seriously complaining that McCarthy isn't speaker. But what studies actually show is that when Congress, well, forgive me, when Congress passes fewer bills, it seems to be that our economy fares better under those circumstances. So then why would it be insisted that we need a speaker? Why is the presumption that we need more laws? I was talking with a close friend of mine, and I was asking them, I was saying, okay, you know, what's your take on this? And they were saying, well, isn't it the case that Congress exists to pass laws? No. What representatives are supposed to do, at least according to the Federalists, is refine and enlarge public opinion. So therefore, there's, insofar as that's their primary goal, that doesn't automatically mean passing more law in order to refine public opinion. Doesn't require that at all. So if that's the case, if they're doing their job by having a debate, which is refining public opinion, and then also it's the case that fewer laws means that Congress can't tank our economy, on the whole, just from a neutral evaluation, that should be good, right? Like, fundamentally. And others agreed. Oh, and then the last point that I was making, that Monica in our Talk Politics group, so if you're just joining us, we have a Talk Politics group, we refer to the individual people's responses. And what Monica said is, okay, if we're going to have reps in the House, then are they actually representing us if they're not willing to stand up to leadership? Because if they always go along with leadership, then it can't be the case that they are always doing what the people want, because there's going to be disagreement between what people want and what the leader wants, fundamentally. So why are we electing the people to Congress if they're just going to go along with what leadership wants or do whatever other people want? Makes no sense. And that's really the final verdict, and that we all seem to agree on, is that, hey, this debate is good, it's healthy. Whereas you had some people, perhaps they'd be called neocons or party loyalists out there, saying, well, we have to have this to stop Democrats. Democrats are so evil that we have to elect a leader now. Well, if we're electing a leader under the wrong circumstances, then we're not doing any better than what Democrats are doing, and that doesn't make any sense. Bill says in the chat, I think the speaker is more about a political position than a speaker for the people. The good thing is that the Freedom Caucus negotiated concessions with McCarthy. Yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to that point, Bill. And also consider this: McCarthy, back in 2010, wrote a book, or collected some essays, with Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor, two other former speakers of the House. And what they were anointing themselves as is they were championing themselves as the young guns. Okay, we're here to take back the GOP from these stodgy old farts who don't do enough to rein in government spending and government control the whole sectors. And so therefore, when McCarthy was writing that, he was writing that with a sort of rebellious attitude that people in the House Freedom Caucus have. So therefore, if anybody were to understand, it would have been McCarthy himself that empathized with the position of those in the House Freedom Caucus, fundamentally. So this idea that everybody was against it, that if we don't have agreement, that if we don't have a speaker, that if Congress doesn't do things, that's the media, right? That's the media lobbying to continue business as usual. And that's why something like this podcast is so important, because the media isn't going to provide any analysis of the situation or circumstance. They're not even going to try to contextualize the story. They're just going to say, well, so-and-so is bad. House Freedom Caucus is bad because they don't believe in having a strong leader. They dare to disagree. They're against democracy, when in reality, the opposite's true. The House Freedom Caucus made the House more democratic, fundamentally, full stop. And so that's why, again, I'm calling on you guys, if you can, go to ko-fi.com/Reichenbach Media and donate a cup of coffee, so that way we can get out to more people. We're not going to be able to reach more people with more thorough analysis if we keep donating our time and attention to a media system that's more interested in lobbying for particular candidates than analyzing real situations. Our next question was, so what I asked was, and what I wanted to know, because nobody was really talking about this, about what it was that the House Freedom Caucus wanted to do, is I just asked, three basic measures that they supported, and if people liked it. Planning to reduce spending, committees to investigate the weaponization of government, and the ability for an individual member to recall a speaker. And the overwhelming consensus, we had 41 votes. 41 votes. And if we look here, there wasn't a single no vote about what it was that the House Freedom Caucus was doing. Not a single person said that they didn't like, at least in theory, that they didn't like the measures. There wasn't a single person, and yet everybody in the media was bashing the House Freedom Caucus. Oh, we need strong leadership. Oh, this is chaos. This is like January 6th. This is all bad. These guys are insurrectionists. Okay, well, if we look, and of course 41 people isn't the entire world, or 29 people, or however many people, but nobody really said, you know what, that was a scam. We need a centralized speaker. We don't need to investigate the government, and we don't want to reduce spending. That wasn't true at all. So the media was so far off the mark of what people really seem to think, then it's absolutely astonishing that anybody funds these people at all. Now, a lot of people did express doubt. Jared said, well, yeah, these things won't really happen. Republicans are just saying this. Well, that's probably true. Something will get blocked, or they'll lack the will, or they'll get involved in some kind of culture war, probably. We'll have to wait and see, and make sure that Republicans are actually able to get on board with the popular agenda. Michael also expresses skepticism when he said, well, the committee to investigate weaponization of government could be good, but it'll probably become a partisan hackery, most likely. He likes the ability to recall the speaker, although he said he'll have to look more into it. And he really doubts that any of these spending measures are going to go through. And I think that's probably true. Yeah, no, right. It is, Bill. The media trying to control the narrative. No, that's right. And so what the media will do is they'll publish all these articles that get all these views, and people will really disagree with what it is that they're saying. But people don't have any kind of outlet to disagree and say, hey, I think this is BS. So then, therefore, nobody knows what it is that's going on or what people actually believe, because nobody is really talking with people. The whole purpose of this program, the whole reason why I set it up, is so that I can talk with people. I'm not trying to talk to people. I don't need to talk to people, right? I'm talking with people. I'm having conversations with friends. I'm trying to figure out what it is that people actually stand for, what it is that people care about. I'm not telling people, oh, this happens, you have to agree with me, I'm smarter than you, I'm a big professional. I'm not doing that. I don't have to do that. Nobody should even be doing that. You know, you have people that are dressed in suits that get on TV that pretend like they're professionals, and they're really substituting people's opinion for their own, and then acting like people shouldn't know what it is that's going on. And I think that's a sham. And I think anybody who's listening ought to feel empowered. Hey, this is a sham. I'm allowed to say whatever it is that I want. I don't have to agree with the media. And I hope if you go to that Talk Politics group that you're encouraged to start a conversation of your own, or to go in there and voice disagreement or agreement. We're never going to know the truth, though, if people just sit home and let the television talk for them. You guys can do that if you want. You know, heck, I could even pack up the show because there's not a billion people, but I don't believe in that. I think that it's time people have the courage to speak up for themselves instead of letting other hacks do it for them. And the inadequacy, okay, of the media is confirmed. Okay, it's confirmed when I'm having conversations with people and I'm saying, hey, most people don't know anything about the rules governing the House of Representatives prior to McCarthy's election. And I said, hey, does anybody know about these rules prior to last week? And if we look at the comments, if it'll let us look at the comments, maybe there's a hacker in our system, who the heck knows. If you look at the comments, nobody knows anything about the House rules. I had heard nothing about the rules until after the election was done. One commenter mentioned. Another commenter says, I'm embarrassed to admit that I have little knowledge of how the internal rules of the House or Senate really operate. Well, that's okay. Most people really don't, and that's fine. But when the media goes into something and they say, well, everything the House is, the House Freedom Caucus, that's illegitimate, that's a scam, that isn't right. Well, how do you know? Most of the people don't even know about the rules. You as a journalist probably aren't that familiar with the rules that are governing the House. So how can we say whether or not it's a scam to start with? If you don't know what the rules are, then how do you know whether something's legitimate or not? And, you know, the media wasn't helping the people think through this. It was doing what it always does, and it's bullying people into embracing some fake mob worldview. Okay. There's not a single person in here. There's one that seems to say yes, but he already said something else in a different comment. But there's no single comment where everybody says, yeah, I really understood the rules, and that's how I know that McCarthy was bad, because I understood the rules, or forgive me, that the House Freedom Caucus was bad, and because I know what the rules are and they were violating the spirit of the rules, or there's a bet. Nobody was able to say that because nobody knew what was going on. So it seems a little presumptuous to lobby against the House Freedom Caucus when nobody knows what's going on. You know, nobody knew what it was that was going on. And if more journalists just had the candor and integrity to admit, hey, I don't know what's going on, perhaps I should do some research, then we would be in a better position. But instead, when they don't know because they have to meet deadlines or because they believe in activist journalism, they'll just say anything that they want. They can get a click. Okay. And yet they'll sermonize people about journalistic integrity and being great people. We're journalists. We support truth. Okay. Then read something, analyze something, instead of saying this is chaotic, this is creating fear, this is an insurrection. Get out of here. You guys should be canceled and shame yourself. That's the problem here. For the false narratives to portray the Freedom Caucus is extreme, then people will think their policies are anti-American. Yeah, no, that's right. There's nothing extreme about what it was that they wanted to do. A lot of the stuff that most of the stuff that the Freedom Caucus supported was stuff that other people had already supported at some other point in time. They just wanted an upfront commitment that these things were going to work out. That seems sensible enough to me. Instead of going into a caucus, not knowing what's going on and not knowing if this guy is going to make all the choices for you, which is what speakers of the past had done. And they had failed. They had failed. Paul Ryan didn't get Obamacare repealed and replaced. He didn't build a consensus around it. He prided himself as a young gun. I'm a young gun. I'm a great hero. I'm Paul Ryan. Okay. But you didn't. And so why should anybody want to operate under the rules that those guys had? Actually, I don't know if he had those rules in the past. It's being a little harsh of the gentleman personally. I think it was probable that he could have been recalled. But again, as I mentioned before, the ability to recall speakers had existed in the past. Now that I think about it, it was actually Paul Ryan's predecessor that just stepped down instead of getting recalled by somebody in the House. So that had already existed in the past. So why is that controversial or a surprise? You know, makes no sense. Speaking of things that don't make any sense, we're going to move on to the next segment, national news and nonsense. And boy, there is indeed a lot of nonsense. So we are looking at national news and nonsense, checking out all the stuff that's going on out there. A lot of crazy stuff. So what we have information that is saying that the Biden administration was they were actually planning on canceling gas stoves. Canceling gas stoves. So we have the Biden administration go along with this. See, this is what the extreme position is doing everything you can that's potentially illegal to get your way politically, like what Joe Biden had done. So the Biden administration had planned to ban gas stoves, and what they thought they could do is say, well, we don't want to ban gas stoves right now. That was just for the future. Okay, that's still part of a scheme to cancel natural gas that's not voted on by the people. If the people want to ban natural gas, let them ban natural gas. But when you think that you're part of the executive branch and hey, we can just cancel natural gas on our own, we'll cancel pipelines, we'll cancel stoves. Heck, if they could, they would probably try to cancel gas-powered cars. Well, they would do it. Okay, but fortunately, we did have people like Representative Gary Palmer who said, 40 million people use household gas stoves. This doesn't make any sense. And of course, this guy right here, who's apparently named Richard Trumka, he's the guy who wants to cancel gas stoves. Now, how is that not extreme? How is it not extreme to say, well, we're going to cancel natural gas and just have electric stoves? Well, those electric stoves are slow. They don't work as efficiently or quickly. Why do we need that? And heck, if those stoves are powered by coal because their electricity, how does that represent any quote unquote progress? I don't think it does. Now they said, well, to justify the ban, what Mr. Trump was trying to say is that, well, there's studies that say that gas stoves emit pollutants. Okay, sure. I mean, if you leave gas stoves on all the time, then they'll emit a lot of pollutants, particularly if you're not actually cooking anything. For sure. But what these guys never really look at is that they don't look at the cost. Okay, we want to ban gas stoves. How much is that going to cost? What's the trade-offs? Okay, the bureaucracy doesn't believe in that. They just say, hey, we'll ban anything we want. The public's lazy, no one cares. We can do anything. And so insofar as people don't talk or say anything, expect that to continue. Yeah, that's right, Bill. The Freedom Caucus was lobbying for 72 hours to read legislation. You know, if that's extreme, then I support extremism. And heck, who knows if 72 hours is even enough? Might need to be 5 days, 4 days. But that's what it was that people were coming out against, and it seemed perfectly reasonable to me. And listen, I think it's also the case that a lot of people wanted everybody to support McCarthy because he was the best fundraiser. And so in their mind, we all have to couch out to whoever raises the most funds. It's not about representing the people, it's about representing the biggest fundraiser, which is what McCarthy was. Oh, he raised all this money for Republican candidates. Okay, so what? So what? Why not train those candidates to raise their own money? Why not get them their own money? But also, too, money doesn't always mean everything in politics anyhow. Stacey Abrams spent all this money there this last election, I think a record amount of money, $108 million, and still lost. Who cares about fundraising? I mean, that's not legitimate at all. That's not legitimate at all. And until people in Congress say, hey, we're going to focus more about addressing people's concerns instead of bending the needs of fundraisers, then we're going to have these problems, and we should have these problems. Because the House Freedom, see, one thing that the political class didn't like about the House Freedom Caucus is that members of the House Freedom Caucus raised most of their money from donations from their constituents, showing that their constituents actually believe in what it is that they're doing. They don't like that. So outside grassroots money should always bend the knee to big donors. I think that's trash. If it was cold, I wouldn't have to burn energy to heat the house. No common sense anymore. No, well, no, that's true, Bill. I mean, yeah, right. So actually, Bill, if there is global warming, then it should be a good thing because then we won't have to use natural gas anymore. These guys should support global warming. And actually, the studies say that, heck, in most situations, global warming would be good when we look at life or death. I come from rural Pennsylvania, and in rural Pennsylvania, you have a lot of elderly people that get frozen into their homes, or they slip and fall because it's cold outside. If global warming existed more in rural areas, then we wouldn't have the problem that so many people in rural areas have it being a problem for elderly people. The reason why, for example, so many elderly people move to Florida is because it is warm there, and it's less of a threat to their life than being in cold weather, fundamentally. So yeah, that's yeah, we can survive more in the heat than the cold. And that's the nonsense the Biden administration's trying to pull on us. But hey, in addition to the nonsense the Biden administration, we have our old friend, Mr. John Bolton, saying that he's going to run against Donald Trump. His ex-security advisor, John Bolton, wants to run against Donald Trump. And I don't think that this is particularly noteworthy in and of itself, but it is noteworthy that about what somebody like Bolton has really done. Most people have no clue what foreign, quote unquote, foreign policy experts do. And people like John Bolton are the people who are giving everybody in Congress advice about how things are going to run. And so some of those things include what Bolton had done is keynoting paid events hosted by bizarre Iranian terrorist cults, the People's Mujahideen. Okay, during his time as a advisor to Reagan and Bush, he supported proxy war and regime change in Central America. He was also caught up in the Iran Contra scandal, in which the Reagan administration were illegally selling arms to Iranians. That kind of seems like probably a bad thing to do, right? And then 100,000 people died at the hands of various U.S.-backed right-wing militias in Central America. And that's something that people aren't talking about. We have people all across, people and bases all across the entire globe, invading nations, bombing nations, sanctioning nations, killing nations, and most of us have no clue what our runaway military has done. Now, I do believe that we need strong national defense, but our claim to having strong national defense is undermined when all of our spending weakens our country as a whole. And that's, somebody like John Bolton supports spending at all costs. We need to invade democratically elected. We need to invade the nations of democratically elected leaders and overthrow them. Okay, and then heck, we need to get into Iraq, which cost us 2,800 lives. And then in addition to that, say, well, Cuba, Libya, Syria, Iran, these are all on that axis of evil. Okay. I understand why foreign policy people believe such things, but that doesn't mean that we always need more military support, particularly when it is so costly. And that's something that John Bolton has supported all throughout his career. So it's, it's just important to note that, hey, we are going to have a lot of Trump enemies run against Trump, and a lot of people will bash Trump. A lot of people could care less about the people, and heck, even what Trump did. But it's important to note that we have people that are warmongers who, instead of being discouraged altogether from even getting involved in the political arena, okay, are instead probably going to join them, regardless of whether or not they win or lose. They're still going to get a bunch of funds to advocate for more war at a time where more war is not an economically feasible position for the United States. In fact, if we can't have a strong economy, then we can't encourage other nations to align with us to stop war, right? While trading with other nations alone isn't enough to stop war, if you have a strong trading relationship with another country, it's not going to escalate war, right? Then that's commonsensical enough. If I have a friend named Joey and we trade baseball cards every Tuesday, it's probable that we're going to be friends because we're exchanging things. But instead, if I push Joey over and take his baseball cards, he's not going to be a friend of mine, right? And that's indeed what it is that we've been doing. But we'll also get back to the topic at hand. Just wanted to make note of our warmonger friends out there. I want to get back to the topic at hand of talking about or analyzing what it was that the House Freedom Caucus supported. So this article right here, published in a source called City Journal, and it's written by a gentleman named Chris Pope, who typically has a pretty good analytical perspective. And basically what he is pointing out is he's taking us through the history of these electoral votes, and then he's noting why Republicans in the House wouldn't want this setup that political scientists argue will typically happen, that power will centralize in a theory called procedural cartel theory. So what political scientists say is that yes, power will typically centralize in the hands of a strong speaker, and that has typically happened for us in the US. But so for 83 of the past 100 years, typically one party that had the House had the Senate. We don't have that this year. And because we don't, it therefore makes sense that we wouldn't have central power in hands of somebody like McCarthy. Because if the power was centralized in McCarthy's hands, then he would be able to negotiate with Senate Democrats without talking to people in his individual caucus. And that's what concerns people in the House Freedom Caucus is, okay, we don't want McCarthy doing another $1 trillion omnibus package without talking to us. And that's sensible to not want. And this is backed up by a scholar, Chris Pope, and City Journal. Why empower the speaker? We shouldn't want that, because time and time again, it's going to mean what it has always meant. And that means the House Speaker selling out taxpayers to make a deal with Democrats. And Republicans need to say no to doing that. No to bending the knee to any Democrat policy. There's areas where Republicans and Democrats should find common ground, but spending is most definitely not one of them. Not at all. Particularly not at this point in time. It's not like the Democrat Party is a party of Bill Clinton. They're not all Clintonites. They don't support meaningful economic reform. In fact, many would be happy to tank the U.S. economy because they believe the economy has oppressed so many people. So that would be good in their mind. And Republicans have to say no. And if it takes 20 people like Scott Perry to say, hey, we don't want you making a deal with Senate Democrats, then by all means. Perfectly commonsensical. And another gentleman, John Cochran, supports this analysis. He says that the debate in the House was good, as I believed it was. Okay, and in this case, I think he's right, and the media was wrong. Okay, so he basically says, well, I'm not afraid of it. I'm not in favor of every point, but I'm in favor of about 9 out of 10 of them, and serious political reform and policy discussions happening. So that's good. That's good. Okay, we have an economist saying that is well, that's good. And so an economist who knows something versus journalists in the news, why are people turning to journalists? We have an economy or an economist, perfectly sensible, that says, hey, this is normal. If anything, I hope the lesson I can be learned here is that disagreement is normal and good, and that the media that's trying to silence this, those guys are doing us wrong. And we have a list of all that's in there. I mentioned the motion to vacate chairs. What they wanted was amendments to appropriation bills, so that way people can say whether or not something else should be added. Now, the trade-off here is that if everybody offers amendments, that it's going to take longer in Congress to sort through these things. For me personally, I think that's good. How is that not good? I don't think it's been the case that we can say that Congress has done such a fine job that they deserve to pass more bills without talking to each other. I would be happy if that was the case. If Congress was solving so many problems that we needed them to get together, that would be fine. But that's not, I don't think anybody can say that that's what's happening at all. I don't think anybody can say that. And if anything, when we're talking about polarization, a big part of that is because people in Congress are not trying to build consensus. Instead, they try to either grandstand to celebrate themselves at the expense of the people, or they offer bills that they know that the other side won't support. But if they try to get things that people agreed on done and were willing to justify that, then we wouldn't have that problem. But that's not going to happen if we're just ramming through bills. People aren't going to have an incentive to work things out and build those crucial relationships fundamentally. And it's one of the reasons why I believe that the House Freedom Caucus was right to do it. Now, one thing they supported that I don't think makes any sense is term limits. California has term limits, and I don't think government there is functioning. And I think term limits disincentivizes lawmakers building meaningful relationships. But they also wanted 72 hours publication of bills. We talked about that. They wanted single subject bills, or basically they wanted bills that would have to be, there's a procedure that you can use in Congress to say that the items in this bill are not germane to the actual bill. So for example, if a bill contains a subject of two separate things, like we'll say one wants to deal with energy subsidies and one deals with earmarks, then you could challenge that, and the parliamentarian would review whether or not that aspect of the bill is germane. So, and if you want to get rid of that, of people challenging whether or not aspects of a bill are germane, then there would have to be 20 minutes of debate, which would hopefully draw more public attention to the aspects of the bill that are not germane. Or, in other words, when you had something like the IRS agents being added into a bill, the 80,000 plus IRS agents into a spending bill, that could be challenged for whether or not that's germane to the actual bill, and perhaps it wouldn't be. We have the creation of a bunch of subcommittees, and that's mostly what's going on. We wanted to rein in spending, slower process, as mentioned in the New York Times. Apparently, they wanted to hamstring ethics investigation. I don't really understand that aspect. I'll certainly look into it, but I don't. Well, I don't think that's true. They say reversing pandemic era changes. They also got rid of remote voting in that package too. And then apparently they also supported, through this negotiation, they were able to get support for a bill that would say, Joe Biden, you can't just release our strategic oil reserves unless we're actually drilling more oil and gas leases on federal land. Again, seemingly perfectly sensible. So we will conclude, and so that's the main gist of what it was that the Freedom Caucus was. We'll conclude here by going back to a local academic. His name is Daniel Larison. He actually lives in Lancaster. And he is an analyst of foreign policy. And what he's saying is, hey, maybe before we talk about attacking China so much, we should, actually think about what it is that's going on. In fact, he announced that the momentum behind a hardline consensus on China will only grow, and that once there is that consensus about China being an enemy, then it's not going to be a question of whether or not it should be done, but how we should attack China as an enemy. And there's just a lot that should really be thought about here, because if we're talking about attacking China when we're headed for a recession, we're not going to be in a position to do any damage to China without harming our economy first. And that should be common sense at this point in time. But because there already is a consensus, what he's saying is, well, it's going to be harder for policymakers to refuse to go along with the China consensus. Just like the whole Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Well, there was really not any accountability for those people being wrong. Just like, because the public has accepted, perhaps a little too uncritically, that we need to go to war with China, if something disastrous happens, there's going to be little accountability for the people who are agitating for war with China. And for anybody in the right mind, that should be a problem. One, again, whether or not we should go to war with China in the first place, but two, if we do and somebody gets it wrong, how are we going to hold those people accountable? Some of them, you can't really hold that accountable. If they're in the executive branch and they try to confront China, well, very tough to deal with. And so that's what it is that we have for our discussion of national politics. Next, we'll move on to a little bit of commentary. Throughout the entire debate about whether or not Kevin McCarthy should be House Majority Speaker, one question should remain the forefront of our mind, or should have remained at the forefront of our mind. And that is, what happened to power of the people? What happened to the belief that our representatives are there to represent us and therefore to speak out against anything, anybody that is perceived as a threat to their constituents? What happened to that? What happened to the belief that our representatives are there to act in our interest, and that's an unequivocally good thing? Seems as things have become more debated in America, instead of debating even more and looking for more solutions, more ideas, and more compromise, we're going the other direction. We're looking for more unity, more false consensus, more wrong-headed agreement about things that typically don't matter. But that's not the power of the people. Indeed, the term power of the people is what democracy directly refers to. Demos meaning people, crazy meaning power. What happened to the belief in that? Likewise, just as we're not believing in our representatives and them encouraging debate to increase the number of options and ideas out there, there's also seems to be a declining belief in the power of the individual people. Why do people not believe that it's within an individual person's right to talk about politics, to ask questions, to analyze things, to scrutinize things, to call what's in someone's eyes a strike, a strike? Ultimately, at the end of the day, the power of the people isn't going to come back by sitting around and waiting for somebody like Kevin McCarthy to trickle down donor dollars on individual families and say, well, now we're empowered. That's not going to happen. When we're talking about insisting on the power of the people, that's going to come down to us and making our individual voices heard, whether that's having our own radio show, whether that's starting our own Facebook group, whether that's doing everything in our power to exercise free speech. And until we as individuals are able to do that, we're always going to be looking for the next big leader like Kevin McCarthy, Donald Trump, whomever, to lead. But in what way is that American? What way is it American to turn and sit and wait and beg for somebody to do something for you when you're perfectly capable of doing it yourself? Well, back to the matter, it's not. So therefore, if the people want the power, it's time the individual people step up and take it, or perhaps even win it, earn it by appealing to the people, speaking to the hearts and minds of people in their community. But it most definitely can be done. Likewise, the question that came up that we should ask ourselves is, when it comes to politics and working against or for a party, is it necessary to win at all costs? Why, for example, would it be necessary for Republicans to have a Republican majority speaker elected on the first day if it means embracing the centralized power regime in Congress that Democrats adopted? Is that really worth it? Is it worth it to win at all costs by engaging in the same evil tactics as the alleged opposition? Why is that worth it? Who says that that's any good? Is it worth it to win today by throwing out a policy agenda for tomorrow? Because that's what it was about. That's what the House Freedom Caucus was about. It was about not winning at all costs because we have to defeat the Democrats. It was about making a concession today so we have a policy agenda for tomorrow. Sometimes having good ideas comes at the cost of not being able to give people what they want today, but leading them to victory tomorrow. And we should appreciate that we have leaders who are willing to do that. The other bit of commentary or something that we ought to be willing to ask ourselves is, will our national leaders ever accept responsibility for the tension it caused, it created for other international leaders? Can our national leaders ever accept responsibility for the tension that they created between other international leaders? Will that be the case? As things continue to progress in my observation of American society, the answer appears to be no. As our economy continues to sputter, as politicians choose to make things worse instead of making things better, as politicians choose to ignore finding the responsibility of finding a real consensus and instead crusade for their own personal gain, we see more and more scapegoating of the domestic policy failures of America's leaders. We put that responsibility on foreign countries, whether it's China, Russia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, or Mexico. Whatever goes on here domestically is caused by, in the eyes of these disingenuous leaders, these foreign nations. And I think really perhaps we ought to question them more and say, hey, you're saying that the Chinese government and how it operates is a problem. Well, what about here? What about the problem that we have in our vast administrative agency where they believe that they can ban gas stoves? Before we point the finger at China or Russia or whomever, perhaps it's time we point the finger at ourselves. All of us, and particularly our leaders. And that's it for commentary. We are closing up for those who will one day be listening via podcast and going directly to state politics. So we are in our conversation of state politics. So what happened in Pennsylvania state politics? The new Pennsylvania speaker, well, actually, forgive me. Let me provide some context here first. So what happened was in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, as it went, there was a split between a relatively close split between Republicans and Democrats in the Pennsylvania state legislature, where you had 101 Republicans to 99 Democrats. And in order for business to continue in the General Assembly, the first step of the procedure is electing a Speaker of the House. Now, typically, such things will happen by the majority party automatically electing someone within their own ranks to fulfill that role. But in this case, with the margin being so close, they decided to go a different route. Instead of electing a Republican and the Republican caucus coming together to elect a new House Speaker, we had Republican defections. And these defections were led by State Representative Jim Gregory from Blair County and Tim O'Neill from Washington County. And what these two gentlemen believed is we can instead find a quote-unquote consensus candidate, somebody that will be a middle-of-the-road, independent, free-thinking leader. And to that end, they thought that man was Mr. Mark Rossi. Mark Rossi happens to be, though, not registered as an independent. In fact, he happens to be a Democrat. He was a Democrat. He pitched himself to Jim Gregory and Tim O'Neill as an independent, leading them to believe that shortly after he was elected House Speaker, if that were to happen, that he would switch his registration to independent. Hey, trusting a Democrat to turn independent. I wonder if we should, I don't know, believe tomorrow that the sky will turn from blue to green. Or perhaps we should wonder if everything that we've known will just suddenly change. Well, as it turns out, Mr. Mark Rossi did not indeed switch over to be an independent. Golly gee whiz, a Democrat not switching over to be independent. As a result of that, we had somebody like Jim Gregory say, well, you should step down from Speaker of the House. And, well, as the saga goes, in addition to assuming that he was going to be independent, Jim and Tim apparently thought that this Democrat was also going to run a constitutional amendment for survivors of child sexual abuse to be able to pursue a lawsuit against their alleged abuser. That was one of the things one of the concessions that Mr. Rossi apparently made to these two Republicans. Well, as it turned out, Mr. Mark Rossi, the Democrat that people wanted to say that he would become an independent, what he did is he said, okay, well, we're going to run this constitutional amendment for survivors of child sexual abuse, and we're going to do it in a special section on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. All right, great. Republicans thought, okay, this is awesome. We're going to get this amendment done. But go back in time. What is this constitutional amendment really about? Well, this constitutional amendment had already passed both chambers of the House twice, and it was supposed to be on the ballot already. But guess what happened? Well, Miss Kathy Bachvar, the infamous Miss Kathy Bachvar, dropped the ball on survivors of child sexual abuse. She dropped the ball. Big surprise. Democrat Secretary of State Kathy Bachvar dropped the ball. And instead of doing her job of publishing this article in the newspaper as she is required to do, she was doing goodness knows what. So instead, after that amendment wasn't passed, what happened? Did Republicans insist that that amendment be taken care of right away? No. Did they call a special session to have it taken care of and have the process restarted? No. Did Tom Wolf advocate that that was passed immediately? No. And you know why? Because if it would have been, that would have been a victory for potentially Republicans. So this constitutional amendment that was never passed, Jim Gregory's making a deal for something that should have already been passed. Why would you need to make a special deal for something that should have already been passed? Well, who knows? But apparently he thought that it was a good idea. And so Mr. Mark Rossi's calling everybody back into the House to re-vote on this legislation that should have already been on the Pennsylvania ballot. And guess what? He says, oh, hey, you guys come down to Harrisburg. It's Monday night. We're a special session. We're going to get this done. Well, wouldn't you know it? It never gets done. And he cancels session for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So this gentleman that Republicans had trusted and had miraculously thought was going to be independent actually went back on his word for a second time. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't believe this is the fault of Jim Gregory or Tim O'Neill. In fact, I believe that a majority of Southeast Republicans would have voted for a Democrat in the House to start with. And Jim and Tim happen to be guys that they could conveniently scapegoat out of acknowledging that fact, because there's Republicans in the Southeast that get all their money from unions, basically vote with Democrats 50% of the time, and just like to be called Republicans so they can claim to be tough on crime periodically. You know, sad reality, but indeed true. But the fact of the matter is that two Republicans nominated a guy to be Speaker of the House who has done none of the things that he was supposed to. Now, how is that strategically sound? Well, perhaps it isn't. So as a result, all the legislating in the House of Representatives is being delayed. And so after everything got messed up, Mr. Rossi says, well, you know, I'm an independent, but I'm really a Democrat, but I'm not, but I am a Democrat. And he said, well, what we need to do is I'm just going to set up a working group to get this done. Or heck, he doesn't even say working group. He just says work group. And, well, hey, maybe we'll get this amendment done, maybe not. We'll create a working group, and, well, so we'll get it done eventually. And that's where we're at in the state of PA. Politics is a power dispute by in part caused by Republicans who somehow believed a Democrat was magically going to be independent. Very, very interesting. Well, if you enjoyed today's show, or heck, even if you didn't, go to ko-fi.com/Reichenbach Media and help me buy another cup of coffee. By doing so, you'll be supporting independent media capable of reaching more people with greater analysis than ever before. Alternatively, call's up to you. You can support me through ko-fi.com/Reichenbach Media, or you can continue to support the big news cartel, CNN, Fox News, NPR, and give them all of your money, time, and attention. That's your call. I can probably change your mind. I can certainly try. It's up to you. In the meantime, and that's all we got for Talk Politics. Come and see you every Tuesday at 8:30. Make sure to go to our Talk Politics public Facebook group. You also can subscribe to our YouTube as well, so that way you can be notified of whenever it is that we indeed go live. And we'd most definitely love to have you there. And join us at, well, every Tuesday, 8:30, and we will see you then. In the meantime, again, help us out, ko-fi.com/Reichenbach Media. Thank you so much for your time and support. We'll catch you